Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome councillors to the table this afternoon. Just for clarity for those in the gallery, we have a council of 7, quorum is 4, so we have a sufficient number of councillors present to constitute a formal meeting of the municipality of Jasper here in council. Welcome to administrative staff in the forum room today. Welcome to those members of the public in the gallery, and welcome to those members of the public who are watching on our Zoom platform or may watch later on our YouTube channel. I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order. It is 1:31 p.m. April 1st, 2025. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any deletions, additions, or other alterations to be made to the agenda? Seeing nothing, may I have a motion, please, that council approve the agenda for today's meeting as presented? Councillor Waxer, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. We have 2 sets of minutes for approval today, beginning with the minutes of the regular meeting of March 18th, 2025. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? If there are none, may I have a motion, please, that council approve the minutes of the March 18, 2025 regular council meeting as presented? Deputy Mayor Melnick, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And we have before us the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of March 25th, 2025. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Again, seeing no hands, may I have a motion, please, that council approve the minutes of the March 25, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting as presented? Councillor Waxer, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. That takes us through the formal business part of the agenda and takes us to agenda item 4, which is delegations. We have no delegations listed on the agenda, but we do at this point, at every meeting, welcome input from those in the gallery to speak to any matter which is on our agenda. And so just for clarity on our agenda for this afternoon, 6.1 is the Jasper Recovery Coordination Center progress update. We will then have a director's report from the Director of Design and Standards. We have a matter dealing with a letter of understanding with the Jasper Municipal Library. 6.4 is a matter pertaining to the Senior Center in Jasper. 6.5 is a request to change the potential location of a pop-up business village from Vermont Drive to Patricia Street. 6.6 is a matter dealing with an update of our equity, diversity, and inclusion policy. And 6.7 is a matter dealing with the potential to revisit the 2025 approved budget. So if there's any member of the gallery who wishes to speak to council respecting any one of those matters on our agenda, you are welcome to do so. Time is limited to 3 minutes each, subject to questions that you might get from councillors. So if there are members of the public, please identify yourself, come forward, give your name, and if you're representing an organization, let us know which organization, and let us know which matter on our agenda you wish to speak to.
No, it's working. I tested this one.
Hi, my name is Tim Hovorka. I live at 411 Beaky Street.
Tuesday. Is that comfortable?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Okay.
Hello. Okay, Yeah, my name is Tim Hovorka. I live at 411 Geeky Street. I've been there for 33 years. I have never had any problems with much noise or extra light at nighttime or parking issues for that matter, very often in front of my house or behind my house. Now you're going to be taking a parking lot away from the downtown area, which I find to be kind of an important part of tourism in Jasper, because people come here and rented vehicles and all kinds of things and need places to put them. And that's parking that's being taken away. And especially when they have a place that's already been okayed and is a better location in my mind, because there's infrastructure that's there with bathrooms and so on. Now, if you bring in all these pop-up businesses that are going to be there, your letter says there's going to be like 6 to 15 of these businesses there. Now, what's going to happen when 6 to 15 of these businesses get there and they have all their staff there? Where are they going to go to the bathroom? They're going to run to the Applebee, they're going to go to the Worcester Hotel, or they're going to have to go across the road to the Connaught and use that bathroom that they share with all the tourists. Is that going to be the case for that? And then these pop-up businesses, are they going to be like one level? Or are they going to double stack them? Or what's going to happen there? And you say the businesses that are going to be there, you list about 6 of them that are going to be there now. One's going to be a bike shop. That's pretty quiet. Nothing wrong with that. It's a pretty quiet type of thing, I guess you could say. There's going to be a liquor store. There's going to be lots of traffic with late night traffic, and it's all going to be lit up. These people's businesses have to be protected, and they have to be protected with lighting that's not there now. I'm dealing with a dark parking lot in my backyard, which I've dealt with since I've been in this town, and the people that were there 70 years before me dealt with that as well. Now you've got this pop-up business. I can understand people wanting to have their businesses and get on with their lives, but when you have a different location that has already been okayed, and because you got a $1.8 million grant from nice people that gave it to you, how far do you think $1.8 million goes these days? Like, look at this place. Come on, let's think about it. And then the companies, the rafting company you're going to put in there, are they going to be bringing their buses into that location, or are they just going to have a kiosk there that's going to take the people, and then everyone's going to go down to the car wash and load the buses there, where they store them, and then off they go to the rivers for their floats. There's 15 or 20 different floats a day probably out of one of those companies, and they're going to have their diesel stinking buses running outside. Well, I got to sit out on my deck and get mouthfuls of diesel exhaust. This is changing the whole downtown area. It's just wrong, especially when you already have a place in place that was approved earlier. But the big change is the $1.8 million that won't go very far. Contractors will suck that up in about 6 months. Thank you very much. I came here actually to talk about the rockaboo thing, but because I got a lot to say about that as well, but apparently it's not on the agenda. This is agenda 6.5. This is the one I'm talking about. Thanks so much for your time, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Hovorka. Before you leave, firstly, let me commend you. I timed that at about 3 minutes and 5 seconds. So I don't know whether you practiced that or it just was fortuitous, but that was excellent. Thank you. There may be questions from councillors for you.
Ask away. I'd like that.
Yeah, fair enough. And just to reiterate, you mentioned the other topic that's on your mind, which is
It's on my agenda as well. The one that I got that came knocking on my door telling me that this was going to be discussed here today,
it's
but apparently it's not. So
it is not
wasting my time as well.
It will be on a future agenda. A week or I think exactly a week ago, we referred that question back to staff, and there will be a report that comes before council at a later date, and that will be back on the agenda, and we will attempt to make sure that people have notice of when that is back on our agenda.
Because that thing's not even in service. It's just sitting there doing nothing. It's not even being used. It's just sitting there. There's nobody climbing on it right now. And if there is, it's probably against the law because it's all cased in ice. It's probably not even safe.
Again, thank you for that. Those comments will be recorded. And we will come back to those at an appropriate time. But again, are there questions from councillors for Mr. Hovorka?
I guess I did a good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Come forward, please identify yourself. Although I know who you are, for the record. Please state your name and your affiliation with any group or business that you represent.
Yes, my name is Carlos Rodrigues. I'm here on behalf of Jasper downtown Knoxville, the Stone House, and the Whistler's Inn. And I'm not against the pop-up and all that, but I just think the location is wrong. At the hostel, we pay 7 years ago, we paid about $80,000 for parking at the parking authority. And by taking that away again, so we need more parking. Same thing with the Stone House, about 25 years ago, I had to pay about $30,000 in parking. At the parking authority, the same thing. Same thing with the Whistler's Inn, we have to pay for parking for guests to stay somewhere. You guys taking that away, so I'm just wondering where people are going to park in the summer with all the businesses and all the people living there. But I'm not against it. I think before was approved somewhere else, and I think it's a great spot. And about the, like Tim, we're gonna talk about the other issue, but it doesn't look very good there downtown. That's my concerns.
That is your presentation?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, that is your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Rodrigues. Again, you've mentioned the other aspect that's not on today's agenda, so we will welcome you back another time if you wish to speak specifically to that. But we heard you say that you're not opposed to the pop-up village, just not in that spot. And you've alluded to payments that have been made in the past to the parking authority and specific to a business that uses that. So appreciate
Payments, but
appreciate
more
that.
people are going to park, there's lots of people living there and businesses.
Understood. Thank you very much again. Before you leave, are there questions from councillors? Councillor,
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland, and I appreciate all president feedback. Thank you both for coming. And to Mr. Hovorka. My question actually is for administration. Can you explain parking authority, and that was before I was a councillor, and how that, what that means?
Mayor Ireland, through the Councillor Hall, I'll do my best to give you an explanation of what the parking authority is, but in a nutshell, if a development does not have enough room or for various circumstances cannot accommodate their parking requirements on site, as was the case for some of the properties Mr. Rodrigues outlined, a contribution to the parking authority goes to creating new stalls, but it could be anywhere in the community, is my understanding. So it's a contribution from the developers to ensure that there is sufficient parking. Having that said, I don't believe they're assigned in any specific location. I would to Mayor Ireland to confirm, as he would also be familiar with that file, but it's just a general pool of funding for new parking lot developments, for example, is my understanding.
Thank you.
and I will concur to that extent. There was something specific, I thought, with respect to the downtown hostel a year or two ago, which might be slightly different than the standard contribution to the parking authority, and I will have to look at the records for that. But thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Rodrigues? Here's one. Thank you for your presentation.
Getting to be a regular thing. I too am disappointed that we're not talking about the other thing, but that's okay. Especially there's only got 29 days left. I as well am in favor of the pop-up village.
Might I just ask you, please, to identify yourself?
Oh, my name is Mike Merilovich. I'm a retired store owner. I live at 413 Geeky Street. Yeah, I was excited that I heard about the pop-up village on Canal Drive. It makes total sense. There's bathrooms there, there's a green area there, there's picnic tables. And I did some research this week. There are 144 parking spots there. So the pop-up village will only take 30% of the parking, which means there's 70% for the customers. That'll be the customers that are going rafting. that are going on the bikes, that are going on the adventures that are offered, like the motorcycles. They're gonna have to park their car somewhere. I don't understand how we have hired all this expensive staff to the Muni before the fire, for the Muni after the fire. And the only thing that they can come up with is to sacrifice our limited parking for these projects. Like Aliston is a giant corporation, construction place. Why did they get the RV parking? I'm sure they can make their own pad somewhere. But now there's no RV parking. So you can't park an RV in town. That's a lot of the customers. I mean, I was in the camping business. There's lots of RVs coming around, but I'm not sure exactly where they're supposed to go. And similar with all the tourists, I mean, they're coming, but you're taking away the parking. Like you have 36 units for outside restaurants, which I think is not fair. If you want a patio, build yourself one. Don't take it from the public, because that's what they've been doing. I understand the COVID thing, and now it's the fire thing. So those are never gonna get back to the community. There's always gonna be a reason to keep them on the street, which they shouldn't be there in the first place. But I'm totally in favor of a pop-up on Connaught Drive. I think that's it. I don't want to be pointing any arrows, making any accusations that I can't back up.
All right, thank you, Mr. Merilovich, and well within time. That's appreciated. Are there questions for Mr. Merilovich? Deputy Mayor Milner.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. Merilovich. I believe in a previous council meeting that I did ask about the RV parking and the status of Aliston. And once the debris removal is completed, my understanding was that that lot would be reverted back to the municipality for RV parking. And if I'm incorrect, this would be a good time to correct me.
Go ahead, Mr. Don.
Mayor Ireland, through the Deputy Mayor Melnick, that is correct. The plan is for Aliston to vacate the premises and for that parking lot to return to its original purpose this spring.
Thank you, and I think that will help with some clarity on one of the comments regarding that particular parking, which would be very important for the RV community people who will be coming to visit us in not just Jasper, but Jasper National Park and staying at the campgrounds and having the ability to come into town.
Go shopping. I have one more thing to say. Hello. Now, this is like the things that Carlos was talking about, the parking levies that have been collected for, I think, at least 20 years, if not longer, 25 years. Well, I've been going through the budgets and I cannot find a line item that says parking authority. And I even phoned over at the office and some lady was supposed to call me back about this. And the girl who I talked to acknowledged that there is definitely a parking authority line item, but it's blended in with some other number. Because you would think there would be an awful lot of money in that account. And, you know, I haven't remembering any new parking unless I missed something. Has there been new parking?
Indeed, there has. Right behind your house.
That's been there for a long time.
It was expanded, also.
So that's, they use that money for that. It just doesn't get rolled into general revenue. Is what I'm.
It's a good question, and we can do some research on that, but yes, there has been money spent, and we heard from an earlier presentation with respect to money to the parking authority from the Stone House, which you will remember, but not necessarily everyone will remember. But there were also contributions to the parking authority to expand the lot on Connaught. So the argument applies to either one of those locations for those who make contributions.
So that would be the money that went to the chargers, the electric chargers? Would that have been the parking authority money?
No. Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I think I can provide some clarity on a couple items. One being the EV chargers were funded by the proponents who did the project, so there was no municipal funding that went there. And in terms of the status of the paid parking reserve, I believe, so that's why you're not finding that information in our operating or capital budgets. Our reserves are listed separately. They do come to council from time to time. We have a reserve policy, so they're set aside in a different account, and all expenses from reserves have to have council approval. So it's set by bylaw. I couldn't tell you the number. We could find out and let you know, but that is why you can't find it in the budgets, because it's a reserve. It's not an operating or a capital line.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland, and thank you again for coming, Mr. Merilovich. This is becoming a regular thing, and may I remind you, there's an election coming this fall.
Oh, I know.
My questions for administration, whether the pop-up village goes at Cannot Drive or Patricia Street, is the intent that the raft buses will be pulling into those parking lots and picking up their clients there?
With your, beg your forgiveness, Mayor Ireland, I think the collection of questions specific to the pop-up village might be best handled at the agenda item, if you're okay with that, because I'm imagining there's gonna be quite a few and it might be a little bit more coherent. But quick answer is no buses. Kiosk is the answer.
Thank you for that.
Oh my God.
Subject to,
You don't get
Any
rid of
other
those
questions that I don't-
buses, 'cause they took over that parking lot like 10 years ago.
I see
They're out
no,
of buses.
I'm sorry, Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much. And just on that point, I know Councilor Malik asked already, but is there a potential timeline that Ellis Don is going to be out of that parking lot? And it's spring, we're in spring. Does anybody know? I could be put in a spot and I apologize if I am.
Councillor Hall,
I'm leaving.
Mayor Ireland, through Councillor Hall, I believe there's a JRCC update coming as well. I see, Mr. Olthoff. Doug, if you're willing to come up, I think it'd be relevant, just because the question was asked.
Yeah, thanks very much. Worship through Councillor Hall, our expectation is that Ellis Don will demobilize their operations within this calendar month.
All right, thank you all. Are there any more interested parties? Come forward, sir.
Council, my name is Kevin Valdes. I've lived in Jasper for about 6 years now. I live in the Republic of Stone Mountain Village. For the last 6 months or so, we've been subject over there to the views of debris removal, millions of dollars in worth in excavators and noise, early in the morning, late into the evenings, lots of lights, and you could say that there's lots of inconveniences over there, but ultimately that's all they are. We have gone through an extremely huge catastrophe in the town, and us in Stone Mountain are very fortunate to be able to look across and see debris removal every day. It is only an inconvenience to have that, and it's going to be like that for the next few years as contractors come in. You know, people are starting to rebuild their homes and their lives. This pop-up buildings is suggested for up to 3 years. You know, regardless of where it's going to be in town, whether it is in Patricia or Cannot, you're going to lose parking regardless. That's the reality. So it's not a really valid point in my opinion to say whether it's Patricia or Cannot, you're losing parking. As far as washrooms go, again, people have to travel to those same washrooms regardless of where you are. So whether it's when you park at the parking lot on Cannot and go to the bathrooms then, or if you're parked in town and you need to go to the bathroom, you still gotta go across the highway. So yeah, I don't really think that's a valid argument. As far as having the pop-up building on Patricia Street, if you have less vehicles and more foot traffic in those areas, that's gonna congest the town less. It's gonna provide more opportunity for people to walk past the pop-up tent. You know, people will drive to one end of town, have to park in one end of the other, and sometimes they won't go to particular areas, but you know, if you have a pop-up right in town, lots of people are gonna go by there, they're gonna wanna see what's up, they're gonna travel to both sides. And I just think that we should be empowering our municipal employees like Lucas Sherwin's suggestions to why it was a good spot in town. My last point is we just invested in a huge public transit and we have the opportunity now to kind of reshape how tourism is going to operate in Jasper. And I think that we should levy or lean into that opportunity that we have. People can stay in the campgrounds, they can park outside of town, they can park from Hinton. We have transit now that's coming from all these places. We should encourage people to leave their vehicles in the campgrounds and in these parking spots and encourage the use of this great transit system that we have now. So I think that, you know, whether it's on Connaught or Patricia, you know, it's going to be great regardless. But having a hub in town, I think it is a way better idea. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate those comments. Again, are there questions from councillors? It appears not.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Yes, sir. Come forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you. My name is Doug Albert and I am Managing Director of Jasper Source for Sports. I think I wrote everybody on council a letter and appreciate you taking time to read them. I have one or two basic points. Number one, first of all, I'm not in any way, shape, or form against a pop-up village. My point is that I want or would like the village to go back to where the original spot was, which was on Connaught. Our end of town has less parking. You know, there's 55 sites, there's 55 spots. We need parking down there as an area that people can come to, leave their vehicle and not have to pay on the front of my store. I find that, you know, especially in my business, and I'm gonna be to the point that I'm acting and talking for my business. People come in, they rent bikes for the day. They don't want to park out front of the store because they have to pay for the 2-hour parking for the whole day. They also don't want to go and park all the way down at the end of town behind here that's free over by the arena. They have a parking spot right beside my store, and that's the benefit of where I am. I feel that taking that away from us over there, it's a disadvantage to me and to anybody else over there, the restaurants, anybody else that expects their people to have a place to park. A lot of that parking lot is taken up with Parks Canada. And if that parking lot is taken away, they will now be on the street or they'll be down closer to my area. And then now there's even less parking down by us. No disrespect to the last gentleman. Yes, there is bus service and things like that, but I think we're naive to think that people are coming to town and driving their vehicles. I think they have to have a place to park. I think the parking lot on Connaught is a bigger spot. It's a better spot, in my opinion. And that's how I feel about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Elton, again. Congratulations for staying, you stayed well within your 3 minutes, we appreciate that. Are there questions from councillors for Mr. Elbert? I have one then, you did some counting, presumably on your own, or maybe you read a document, but you mentioned 55 parking stalls on that, in that Patricia Street parking. Do you know whether that includes the Parks Canada stalls, or is that?
I assumed it did. That was. Yeah, I assumed it did.
I can get that clarity from staff in any event, but I wondered whether you had that information. Quite all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions from councillors, again, thank you for your presentation.
My name is Bruno Ritter. I am Ritter Desrosiers, and I'm also tenant now above Lulu's, like for private accommodation or for rental accommodation. There's actually above the sports store, above Kimchi, Lulu's, above, I think, Dennis's house. So there's quite a few people that need parking spots. And in the beginning, after the fire, I would park in front of the building, just thinking, well, yeah, I'm parking here. Bela called us and said, no, you gotta go in the parking spot over there because here is still 2 hours. And so that was good. But so you would take away quite a bit of parking, even for tenants. I'm not even talking businesses, but for tenants in that area. Because we have no street parking in front of the building. The other thing, like what everybody, I might repeat myself, but we always talk about percentages. And if you have a bigger parking lot, like it is over on Canal, much bigger parking lot, and you take a certain percentage away, you're not going to make as a terrible impact. I mean, there always will be an impact. I realize that. And why should it be us or why should it be them? But percentage-wise, it would be a much lesser impact than if you take this away from our little neighborhood. Like over the last 20 years being at the Desrosiers, I always felt like everything that you build in parking lots, most of them are on that end of town. You know, they got majority of it. Like in our area, because you beautified the streets, we used to have angled parking in front of the hotel and in front of Smitty's. And for the sake of beauty, which are not disagreeing, but you took a lot of parking away from us. The same in front of the post office, everywhere we had angled parking. It was much easier to get in and out than parallel parking. But, you know, that's down the river, that's done with. But all I'm saying is, don't penalize this area of town when you have a much bigger area over there. And if the Don Ellis parking lot where all the buses park already down there, so then I think it would work much better with the pop-up businesses over there, because you just have more people. I guess that's it. But the main thing is percentage. Like, why take a small thing away and then we have nothing, and over there everything is over there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ritter. 3 minutes and 7 seconds until the end. Okay.
Appreciate it. Any questions?
Questions from councillors? Go ahead, Councillor or Deputy Mayor Milner.
Thank you for coming and the presentation. And in listening, I like to make sure that I have clarity. You had made a mention about that we had taken away the angled parking that was on Patricia and Connaught. And if I recall, that would have been early in my arrival here,
Oh, yeah,
like
it's, that's why it's like,
1992.
Yeah,
Yeah, so in essence, the municipal council did not take away the parking. It was a project when we were administered by Parks Canada. For all the right reasons or all the wrong reasons, but again, for clarity, for people who haven't lived here as long as you have, or a number of us have, I think it's important to understand that people understand that it was a previous project that was done in the early 90s.
I want my two-way street
and
back.
I do realize that. But it all comes back to the point that we have less parking for all the businesses on this end of Patricia than what you have on the other. You know, Connaught.
Other questions from councillors? Mr. Ritter, I have one. You mentioned the need for residential parking for residential units above Lulu's and Kimchi House and
Well,
make
and
it
about this phone store and, you know, the area that is the same, it would be on TT Street, I think.
Are you aware whether any of those residential developments have their own off-street parking? Was that a development requirement? Or has there been any contribution, say, to the parking authority to permit residential parking in public parking lots, which is, of course, different than the norm for residential parking in the community?
I know there is the minimum on the property behind Kimchi and Lulu's. So there is parking spots for tenants. But as you know, you have one for one. But now if you have two cars in one apartment, now you have to look somewhere else. So I think the minimum is taken care of, just like at some of the apartments, you know, you have one per apartment, but you have 2 or 3 cars sometimes per apartment. So that's where the shortfall is.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Apparently not. Thank you, Mr. Ritter, for your presentation.
My name is Henriette. Live at 405 Patricia. Last week, you guys had on Thursday, I believe, the town planners went to Geeky, to people on Geeky Street, and gave them a brochure, a piece of paper, and some questions. And I found out, because a friend sent me a message that they didn't do your place, I said, no. So they had, so Thursday, Friday, I phoned the Muni and I got someone's phone, cell number, and I left a message, and then Lucas called me back in the afternoon, so I was able to settle that in. But they hadn't even considered the people on Patricia as being part of the questionnaire or anything, which I thought was a shame. Because we're the ones that are looking at everything that's going on from my deck. I mean, you know, like, it's just something that, it was a shame that they didn't include us. Anyways, I got that over with, and I wrote letters and filled out surveys since then. And my thing is, as I've been saying and all these things, I'm not against the pop-ups. But again, they had a pre-authorized location, and honestly, they should go there. The bike company and their noise and all the parking they need. It's better for their clients, they'll be able to park there as well, same with the rafting company. Because everybody needs to go to the washroom before they leave on a tour. And that facility is exactly what they need over there, plus it's got handicap facilities as well, which is great. People coming into town, they look for a parking spot that has a washroom. So a lot of people do park there and it's used more. has a lot to do with the washrooms, for sure. And so if they had washrooms at this parking lot, well, then they'd, but permanent bathrooms, not just outhouses that they're gonna put up for these people for the time that they do decide to put the pop-ups there. I don't think it's a good idea to pop ups there yet, because there is no permanent washroom in that location. That's something that they could use their budget on and do that for possibly further down in the years. But right now, for this year, it definitely has to be at the other location on Connaught. And like I say, nothing against the pop-ups. I think it's a great idea, and it's a great initiative that the town is supporting them, and it's wonderful. But it's not, we don't have extra parking as is. As he was mentioning, the parking spots that all these companies have paid for, that we're told to use the parking lot. If I get company, I have parking behind my building. Our building has parking for all the tenants behind. The businesses don't use the parking behind our building. But the others on both sides of ours, the businesses do use the parking behind, so they don't have room for their staff or their tenants upstairs, which is wrong, in my opinion. So if I get company, I call them in and say, hey, where can these people park while they're here for a weekend or whatever? And they've always told me to park in that parking spot. And we'll give you, a note to put on their dash, and, they're covered. Whether or not everybody does it, I don't know. But that parking spot is very near and dear to the people of Patricia Street down there. And to get all those businesses in there, and the noise and the extra fumes and stuff, there's a lot of pop-up kitchens and stuff like that. It'll be quite the thing. Anyways, that's all I have.
Thank you for that. In time, very impressive. Questions from councillors? Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I have a question for administration. With the proposal for Patricia Street, was there washrooms taken into account?
Absolutely. At the Patricia Street location, we're planning on locating a temporary washroom there, so it's on it.
Thank you.
It's in the budget.
Thank you for that. Other questions of the delegation? Apparently not. Appreciate it.
Temporary washrooms don't cut it. I just want to make that clear. The permanent ones there, it's temporary, it's a nuisance for the people living near there, and the smells too, so it needs to be permanent and accessible for the handicap as well. So it's not just a little project, it's a big project that has to be done before any of the pop-ups get put up there.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any other individuals wish to appear as a delegation?
Hello, I'm Lisa Darrah, and I'm with Rocky Mountain Ventures. And we erected the wall in the Patricia Street location. And honestly, I can appreciate the concerns of everybody in the gallery today.
If I may just interrupt, and I'm not sure when you came in, but I have indicated to the gallery that we will receive happily submissions related to the pop-up village, but the issue of the wall, the structure, is not on today's agenda. It will be addressed when administration comes back with a report that we requested a week ago, detailing a number of factors that will be important to our decision. So if you wish to speak to the climbing structure in particular, I would ask that wait until it is on our agenda. If you wish to speak to the pop-up village generally, you're certainly welcome to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. But speaking to the pop-up village, for Rockview, it would be, clearly a very advantageous location for us to be in the Patricia Street area. When we talk about the differences of the parking lots and the parking, like Kevin had mentioned earlier, the Patricia Street location makes significantly less revenue than the Connaught location, and that's when they are full. That's in the height of summer. So those months of the summer, that Patricia Street location has seen a lot of local Jasperites parking in that parking lot. I just wanted to reiterate that Viola does have the statistics in the height of summer. Proportionately, the Patricia Street parking lot makes significantly less proportionately. There are many locals that are utilizing that as a place to park, including some of the folks behind me. So it is a parking lot that is used and doesn't create that kind of revenue because of the local parking. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any questions from councillors?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Darrah. Any other delegations that wish to address council? All right, I see no one jumping at the opportunity. That is why we are here, though, Mr. Merilovich, and happy to entertain any submissions that come forward, but as I see no one else, I am going to declare that agenda item 4 on our agenda today is completed. We will move to agenda item 5, but I will let you know certainly that when we reach agenda item 6.5, there will be a presentation from administration and debate among councillors and potentially questions of councillors to administration with respect to the matter that is on the agenda, which is the recommendation. I hope I don't have to start that over. I will repeat only that delegations agenda item 4 is closed. We will later this afternoon get to agenda item 5. For those interested, there will be a presentation from administration at that time and maybe questions of councillors to administration. You're welcome, of course, to remain and sit through that. There will not be another opportunity for public discussion, but you can certainly listen to council debate any motion that might be made later in the afternoon. That takes us to agenda item 5, which is correspondence. There is no correspondence on our agenda. There has been some correspondence that has been received relative to the pop-up village, and I think that will be covered in a report later today. Is that fair to say? I get a nod with that. That takes us then to agenda item 6, which is new business, and we begin with the Jasper Recovery Coordination Center progress update. And welcome representatives from the JRCC for that report.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Pleased to be back here again. Andy Asarte. I am interim Director of Recovery, backfilling for Mike Park, who's on leave of absence right now. I've brought Doug Olthoff along with me for any questions and answers as well. Very pleased to be here. Last time I presented to council was during a similar backfill back in September. There's been a remarkable amount of progress in terms of the recovery since, and I think council and administration and the community can be commended for the significant amount of work that's gone into the recovery to date and all the progress. It's never fast enough. I know, having gone through recovery myself back in Canmore, but certainly tremendous amount of work been done. The agenda for today's update is similar to, I think, the template you've seen in the past. We'll talk about interim housing, debris management, town rebuild, social recovery, economic recovery, and communications. So already this slide is out of date. There's a significant move-in occurring today with, I believe, another 18 homes being occupied. The homes out in Marmot are now move-in ready, and just as of yesterday had all the occupancy requirements met. There's still a lot of work to do. There's quite a number of units left to be filled, and the target is to have all of the units that are in place right now occupied by June. And so notices have gone out to families to allow for those to be filled, and work's ongoing to connect with those families and look to place them in those units. Debris management is another area where we're reaching a couple of milestones. The demolition permits are largely issued. We expect that the bulk of debris removal will be completed this month, and so that's a huge milestone in recovery. And just recently have had some confirmatory sampling completed for environmental testing. This is an important piece in closing out demolition permits, and so we're pleased to say that the first handful of those demolition permits are now in a position to be closed, and that's going to mark the start of the next phase of work. And as those demolition permits close, that allows for the sites to be occupied for reconstruction. There's an excellent map on the website, very useful for keeping track of how things are progressing, and I would encourage everybody to keep an eye on that as work progresses. In terms of the rebuild, the planning crews are quite busy in Jasper and Parks. I will leave it to Ms. Saunders to provide any other detail on that. But work is ongoing, and there's a significant amount of pre-application work, early correspondence that's leading to the start of submission of development permits, and soon see building permits as well. And the hope is to process those in a timely fashion to allow for actual construction to start. In terms of social recovery, key program is the Recovery Pathfinders. That first cohort of training is completed. There are additional recruits and just really good community uptake for the program and enthusiasm for the program. This is going to be, we're moving into a challenging time, I would suggest. It's going to move into peak season. It's fire season. Certainly, there's going to be a lot of growing anxiety, I would say, from my previous experience. And so having these supports in place now is terrific, and they'll be much needed. There's a needs assessment underway. This is an update to prior work to have a clearer understanding of household needs, and that work is taking place alongside Red Cross, who I'll note has, from all indications, is a terrific partner in the work that's happening around interim housing and for social supports. And so want to acknowledge their excellent work to date and the important role they're playing in the successful early successes of the interim housing program. And as mentioned, the recovery group's turning attention to this upcoming wildfire season. We've talked a little bit about the economic recovery initiatives. There's a business lunch and learn series underway. Information can be found online. In addition to the pop-up business village, which will be subject to the later agenda item, there's also support through that grant program for folks who occupied businesses in the industrial lands and were impacted. And this is to provide them with space for their business while they're waiting for their space to be rebuilt. A note on the pop-up village. Outside of all the considerations in terms of decisions for location, I would suggest that timing of the decision is important. There's significant work that needs to go into either the industrial or commercial pop-up initiatives. And so having a clear direction to allow for the team to do the legwork to get these launched. That's location dependent, and the more time, the better, in order to get these initiatives up ahead of as early as we can in the peak season. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to take questions and also to direct questions to folks who may have more detailed answers.
Thank you, Acting Director Sarte for that report, and thank you for accepting the challenge to come back and fill in during the absence of Mr. Fark. You did exceptional work back in the fall when you were here, and we really do appreciate that you're back to help us through these next few weeks of critical timing for our recovery. So thank you for that. Again, thank you for the report. Are there questions from councillors, either to Mr. Sarte or to him that he will deflect to others? Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland, and thank you for rejoining our team. I do have a few questions. The first is around debris removal permits. This is a question I'm getting from residents. The remaining 1%, is it a matter of not applying, or I'm just curious what that it is?
Thank you very much. Your worship, through Councillor Hall, it is the case that Price County continues to reach out to some of the folks who have not made applications for demolition permits, and that is the challenge.
I mean, I have just a couple more quick ones. Roughly, what are you seeing the timeline being for removal, post-removal testing?
In worship, through Councillor Hall, the timeline for post-confirmatory sampling, additional excavation work and additional testing is typically faster than would be the case in a broad spectrum confirmatory sampling case. The information we have from Ellis Don, it's a roughly 2 to 3 week period, whereas we're looking at 6 to 8 weeks for the broad spectrum testing.
Thank you very much. And my final question is around the needs assessment survey. 46% of who was reached or who were chosen. Is that a good amount? Is that normal?
Yeah, that would be considered very good to excellent result in terms of response rate for a random sample survey online.
Great, thank you very much.
Questions from other councillors? Deputy Mayor Mellon.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. Under the economic recovery portion, the Commerce Continuity Initiative, it does mention the $1.8 million in federal funding. It was mentioned also during our delegation presentations. We've got it identified here that's actually for 2 projects. It's for both a pop-up village, but also for the industrial land requirements to assist with our, I guess, our construction trade, our businesses and so on that also lost structures, but are not in the retail sector. And I wonder if you might just expand a little bit more about how that 1.8 might all work out in the end. I guess you're still looking for feedback from the industrial sector, but I think it's important for everyone to understand that that 1.8 is actually for 2 separate projects.
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Correct. It's for 2 different initiatives as well as the administrative costs for the 2. And so I don't have the specific numbers of how they break down, but that is there's particular allocation, and the presentation later can provide detail for the pop-up initiative and overarching admin costs.
Thank you.
On that same topic then, Mr. Sarte, and in that same section of your report, the economic recovery section, and reference to the pop-up business village, the indication in the report is that JRCC collected feedback to help inform council's decision about where to locate that pop-up village. And I take it that the details of that feedback will be presented in in the subsequent report, when we get to that agenda item.
Correct.
Thank you for that. I had then one further question, and there may not be an easy answer to this, or it may be difficult to calculate, but the report indicated, I think 76 families have been relocated as of about 4 days ago, and there's another 18 occupancies today, and Marmot Meadows is now open to receive. So we're approaching 100 families, roughly. Do we know how many residents are included in that number of families, and how many residents we have been able to provide with interim accommodation at this stage?
Mayor Ireland, we have made that calculation. Unfortunately, I did not come prepared to communicate that to council today, so I'd be happy to make sure that that report is given during the next briefing.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Norton. Are there any other questions? Councillor Waxler.
Apologies for the slow response to the microphone. I just wanted to express gratitude and enthusiasm for the fact that the Pathfinder program has had good response from the public. That's I think that's heartening to hear. And as you move through the community, you are seeing people more impacted now, potentially than there have been in the earlier. So I believe that this will be a very important contributor to the well-being of the residents of Jasper. Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I also wanted to express gratitude. I completed the Pathfinders training on Friday in the first cohort, and the training is valuable and needed as we move into a challenging time in recovery. Also, we moved our family into interim housing yesterday, and I thank you. We didn't hear the trains. We have cable TV, which we've never had, so our son is thrilled. So thank you very much.
If there are no further questions, I would entertain a motion from a councillor to receive the report for information. Deputy Mayor Melnick, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you both, gentlemen. That takes us to agenda item 6.2. Director's report from the Director of Urban Design and Standards. Director Sanders.
Good afternoon, Mayor Ireland and Council. I was last year at the beginning of January to provide my first ever director's report. This is the second. So the time period I've been reflecting on is from January 1st to yesterday, so a 3-month stretch. I'm going to break the presentation into 4 chunks. So one being just to simply name some of the major projects the team has been working on, some highlights on staffing, some highlights on service trends, and then lastly, communications and engagement. So to start, the department is looking after town planning, development coordination, housing and energy and environment. And I would say the highlights in here probably are the $9.4 million we got from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, which was the Housing Accelerator Fund. That has been before you, and the Housing Action Plan was before you 2 weeks ago for your consideration and approval. That's the big item on the housing front. When it comes to town planning, we've been working closely with our colleagues at Parks Canada to yet again update the land use policies to find some ease for folks with the rules as they're rebuilding. And in particular, this latest round on March 14th involved some particular look at the rules for the R4 district in Snapes Hill. I'm going to speak in a few moments to the engagement that we're going to be doing on land use density and parking, which is always a hot topic. When it comes to development coordination, we've been doing quite a bit of work internally to help ourselves get organized for the coming transfer planning authority. It could be as simple as working with our colleagues across the organization just to think through how do we think about land as an organization when we haven't done that in a cohesive way yet, just in fragmented ways. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's an opportunity for us to make some shifts. We've been supporting various initiatives, including we have a request for proposals out right now for e-permitting, for example. So we've got quite a few irons in the fire. And then we're also advancing the contractual documents so we can launch the Clean Energy Improvement Program, which will have some funding opportunities for residents who did not lose their homes, because they also need some attention on ways to improve their buildings from an environmental perspective. On the staffing side of things, I'm pleased to announce that the housing manager position we spoke about 2 weeks ago has been filled, and it has been filled by Leanne Peltier. And we're also for a 2-year term, and we are now looking for a housing coordinator for a 2-year term. That posting will be out shortly. And there's a position out right now. We're going to be conducting interviews shortly for an administrative assistant to focus simply on development coordination. So that's some staffing shifts in the department. In terms of service trends, our team has been meeting with development applicants before they go to Parks Canada, which has been helpful. Parks Canada is also doing that service, but we're also just throwing our efforts in to help them out. There's been an increase also for our staff to review applications to MPL Place. So that is yet another indicator of the need for affordable housing in Jasper. On the communications and engagement front, really pleased to announce that in March, the Builder's Guide finally came out. So this is a document that the builders suggested in this room back in October when we met with them, that would be something for resident builders and contractors or anybody from outside of town to just understand how things work around here. And things have changed a little bit, so local folks also need to have a sense of how things work around here. We also participated in the Pathfinders program in delivering one of the modules, just simply about rebuilding. The JMHC AGM is on April 15th, so we're planning for that. And then lastly, the engagement is taking place next week. The first phase of engagement to start looking at what are the town values that we can use for the town plan next year, but we want to begin work on those values so we can use them and test them as we talk about residential density and parking, which are 2 of the action items from the housing action plan that you considered 2 weeks ago. The next phases of engagement will take place May 5th to 9th and June 2nd to 6th. And the last thing I would like to mention is there's questions floating around about whether or not people can apply for development permits and building permits at the same time. And the answer is yes. A development permit needs to be approved before a building permit is approved, but they can be applied for simultaneously. I recommend that for folks who are really confident about their development proposal, that it meets the regulations. If they have any questions, they can get in contact with our staff or park staff. And of course, all of those permits can be applied for before a demolition permit is closed. They can run simultaneously. So that's the last tidbit I'll offer up. I'll leave it there, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Director Sanders, for that report. Are there questions from councillors? Councillor Waxer.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, through you to Director Saunders. I've been approached by a number of residents regarding the thought that there is a grant going to be available to people rebuilding to increase their density to have additional spaces. I wondered if you could speak to that possibility.
Yes, Mayor Ireland, to Councillor Waxer, later this month, we will have a request for decision in front of council specifically for funds for additional dwelling units. So that's one of the actions in the housing action plan. Further details are coming.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. My question is, would you recommend residents who lost their homes resurvey their lots? This is coming up a little bit in my conversations as well. Like have a proper survey done of their lot.
Mayor Ireland to Councillor Hall, it is a requirement. It's a good idea to know where you're building. If you don't have a current survey to anyone, my recommendation would be to have one. Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Melvin.
Thank you for the response to Councillor Hall. You referenced a current survey. If a lease was renegotiated with Parks 3 years ago and you have that document, is that considered a current survey, or would a requirement be for an additional survey to be done before you can build?
My recommendation, your worship, would be when you know what you're building, you want to know where you're building. So there will be, and surveyors use a variety of language, but a plot plan. So what you would have as a home builder is a drawing, all to scale, all measured by a surveyor that shows you where the limits are to your property and where your structure is going to be and how far your structure is going to be from the property lines. That's how you know if you're locating something that conforms to the normal rules about how close buildings can get to property lines. So it's not quite the same document. And I'm not quite answering your question. I'll get a more specific response from Parks Canada, but essentially what you need is the work of a surveyor who can make a drawing for you that shows where the property lines are and where your building is going to be. And that would be new work for them because they won't have already drawn what your future building is going to be.
Thank you for that. I will consider your answer, and I'm sure I've got other questions down the road, but it does bring to light in the rebuilding process. One more wrinkle of a rebuild is a current survey, which may or may not be covered by insurance.
If I can just add to that, I understand the need to properly locate improvements within the property in a way required setback from property lines. But a survey requires the survey pins for the surveyor to work from. Do we know, for example, in areas of mass destruction, whether survey pins have been disturbed by the debris removal efforts? And if that is the case, who has the responsibility to replace the individual survey pins?
Mayor Ireland, we do know that survey pins have been damaged or lost. And we also know that Parks Canada is looking after making sure they're placed back.
So at least a starting point for surveyors and outstanding who would have to pay the cost of the fresh survey, but at least the grounding will be there.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Hall.
Thank you again, Mayor Ireland. My question is around the R4 zone and residents who did not lose their structures. I think this has been answered in the previous meeting, but I just want confirmation again. Are they able to replace their non-destroyed structures with new modulars, or do they still have to build a house?
To be honest, Mayor Ireland, through you to Councillor Hall, at this very moment, the answer has escaped my brain. I believe the answer is yes, and I'm gonna double check. Okay. Yes, the answer is yes. I just got a message.
Thank you. Is there a timeline on that? Do they have a certain amount of years to do that, or is it?
There's a 5-year window as a temporary policy that Parks has put in place that can happen. Yeah. I also, if I may, Mayor Ireland, I do want to extend that there's interest from Parks Canada to appear before you as a delegation later this month to give you an update on permit turnaround times and application numbers and all of that kind of thing. So that's something that you can look forward to later this month.
Councillor Roxon.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, through you to Director Sanders. I also just wanted to express appreciation for the builder's guide. I've heard lots of anxiety in residents when they have builders coming from bidding or coming from outside places. Anxiety that they are not aware of the special considerations of building in Jasper. So I think that's a very important step that will quell some anxiety for people. Thank you.
Perhaps one final question then, specific to housing and the dollar amounts in your report. Can you just confirm the $9.4 million of funding from the Housing Accelerator Fund for what project?
Oh, you're testing my memory, Mayor Ireland. So there are 6 initiatives for in the 9.4 for half funding, 6 initiatives in there, which were projects like additional dwelling unit grants, some tax incentive work, some design work so that we could have some designs for people for dwelling units or for buildings that are going to lead to more affordable housing in town. And then also the work that we're going to be doing to update land use policies, depending on what we hear from folks and the engagement that's coming about changing the policies so that we can increase more housing options in Jasper.
Right, thank you for that. The memory sounds great to me. The 7.5 million for affordable housing. Again, relate that to a project if you will.
I sure can. That is an application that went in anticipation of a second JMHC Connaught build. So we have the 40-unit build happening on Connaught. This is in anticipation of building a second building.
And the 11.7 million, some of which is repayable and some of which is a forgivable loan.
And those funds are also for the Connaught builds with JMHC.
With the first one or the second one?
The first one.
Thank you for that. So significant financial assistance from both levels of government for additional housing, long-term affordable housing in the community.
Yes, and we have our staff to thank for making those extensive applications.
Indeed, we do. Thank you for clarifying all of that for the benefit of the public. Councillor Melnick or Deputy Mayor Melnick.
Thank you for that, and now looking at the dollars and what's involved, and you mentioned the work of staff. In a previous meeting, it was mentioned about the staffing levels in the community. And of course, in our rebuilding and trying to accelerate building permits and debris permits and so on, our staffing levels have increased. But I think by having, for example, a new housing manager and a coordinator, we're able to access some of these funds, which are going to help rebuild the community. So, you know, I just want to point out that while it looks like there are a number of staff being added, the type of work that's being done is going to have a short-term and long-term very positive impact in this community.
If there are no further questions for Director Sanders, I would thank her for her report. Impressive that you can keep it to 1 page. Thank you for that. And I would look to a councillor for a motion that the report from the Director of Urban Design and Standards be received for information. Mr. Waxer, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Yeah. All right, I have had an indication from councillors that they could use a short respite from the work. So it is now approximately 10 to 3. So we will recess for 10 minutes and reconvene at 3 o'clock.
them and the vote.
3:01, and I will call us back into session following that recess. And I think we are at agenda item 6.3, Jasper Municipal Library Letter of Understanding. That comes to us by way of recommendation from Committee of the Whole. I would look to you, acting CAO Madon, if there is anything to add from an administrative perspective on this matter.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. This was a pretty straightforward routine item. I don't believe there were any changes requested from the last committee of the whole, so the letter is before you as is, from the last meeting.
If there are no additional questions from councillors to administration, I would look for a motion from a councillor. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I would make the motion that council approve the Jasper Municipal Library Letter of Understanding as presented.
Thank you for that motion. You wish to speak to the motion at all? And if not, is there any debates? Right, I will call the question that council approve the Jasper Municipal Library Letter of Understanding as presented. All those in favor? Are none opposed? That is carried. That takes us to agenda item 6.4. Senior Center in Jasper. Again, that comes to us by way of recommendation from Committee of the Whole. And in this case, the recommendation is that council authorize the mayor to write a letter requesting that the government of Alberta include additional living units for seniors as well as a seniors center space in the plans for the rebuild of Pine Grove Manor. Are there any outstanding issues to be directed toward administration with respect to that? Councillor Waxer.
I just wanted to speak in favor of this. I know that as the demographics of Jasper and the country are aging, and the baby boomer generation is all entering into the senior years. This is very critical, and that the opportunity that loneliness and isolation is one of the most worrisome and one of the most damaging aspects of aging, and it is now known as to be as dangerous as smoking or harmful as smoking. So I think this is having a larger and centralized seniors space is going to be critical to the health and well-being of our older residents.
Thank you for that, Councillor Waxer. Is there a councillor prepared to make the motion? Councillor Waxer.
Council authorized the mayor to write a letter requesting that the government of Alberta include additional living units for seniors, as well as a senior center space in the plans for the rebuild of Pine Grove Manor.
Thank you for that motion, Councillor Waxer. Does any councillor wish to speak to the motion? I will speak in support and again, simply reiterate the comments that you made, but also to again emphasize that there are a number of seniors who lost their homes, and it is a real challenge to get them back into the community. But our community absolutely benefits from their presence, and if we can encourage the provincial government to add more living units for seniors as well as a senior center, our entire community will be strengthened, see the benefit from that. So I wholeheartedly agree with the initiative and will be honored to write such a letter on behalf of council, assuming the motion is passed. If there is no other councillor who wishes to speak to the motion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And that takes us to agenda item 6.5, where we still have some interest in the gallery. I understand, Director Sanders, that you will be leading first on this matter with a presentation that you have prepared that deals with a number of matters, including input that has been received from the public over this. So I will turn it to you to make the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I'll speak for a couple minutes while my colleague Lucas Sherwin is going to pull up a slide deck. First, you're going to hear from me, just a quick recap of things. And then Mr. Sherwin is going to walk through the feedback that we got back from residents. Residents and business neighbors is how we're thinking about it. And then Kaylee LeBranche is going to give you a quick run through of the comparison of the two lots to set you up to make a decision. So the purpose of the pop-up village is very simple, which is to provide space for businesses who lost their premises during the fire. It's not for any other businesses. It's simply for businesses who lost their premises during the fire. We want to do that both to support the economic recovery of those businesses, but also the economic recovery of Jasper. And a decision today about the location of the pop-up village will allow the pop-up village to open. We're aiming for the May long weekend. If a decision is not made today, that's put at risk. So the planning that needs to happen is just detailed planning about which businesses are where, how to organize the washrooms, because we will have a washroom at the Patricia Street location if that's chosen. We need to provide servicing to the site, so electricity, that kind of thing. And then also just simply to provide certainty for the businesses that are involved. So context for the shift in location, because yes, earlier this year you had approved the Connaught Street location. A number of factors, I'm not going to belabor them, but the general sense, and I will admit that this is subjective, and it's a decision ultimately you are going to get to make, as a sense that the Patricia Street location from a visitor experience perspective is better than being on busy Connaught with dust and train noise. This is subjective. So we're endeavoring here to set you up here to make a decision that you'd like to make. So, and then also you've already acknowledged this, Mayor Ireland, that committee referred the Rockaboo situation, how to handle that to administration. That will come back, but I did want to reiterate that any comments to date or even slightly today made about Rockaboo, we're listening and we'll incorporate that back in the request for decision that's going to come back to you. And over the last week, less than a week, like 6 days, not including the weekend, so less than a week, administration connected with residents and business neighbors about specifically the Patricia Street location. And Mr. Sherwin will provide feedback on that. In addition to that, very helpfully, the Chamber of Commerce conducted a survey of business members and also broader residents about the two locations. So we have the results from that, generally speaking. So we're very thankful for that assistance. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Lucas Sherwin and Kaylee LeBranche, and then we'll be over to council for any questions that you might have. Go ahead, Lucas.
All right, good afternoon, council, and thank you, Director Sanders, for introducing me. Director Sanders said, I'll be presenting the results of the engagement work that has been completed as of last week. I do want to take just a second to identify specifically what was completed. We recognize it was a short time frame. And so we undertook some direct public engagement work, including door knocking for residents along Geikie Street, where we weren't able to connect with residents in the door-to-door. While we were going door-to-door, we left a direct survey for surrounding neighbors. As was mentioned earlier, there were places along Patricia Street that we missed, and folks were able to get in touch with us, and we provided that material when it was requested as well, so that we could get some feedback for those folks, not just directly across the alley from the Patricia Street lot, but also sort of in the immediate vicinity there. We also completed door knocking with some of the neighboring businesses. So Kaylee LeBranche went around and spoke to some of the business owners, some of whom we've heard from today. In addition, there was the Chamber of Commerce survey. And finally, we also reviewed letters that were sent into council and spoke to nearby neighbors who contacted us. So we've sort of heard a cross-section of comments. We recognize it was a relatively short time frame, and many of the folks that we heard from over the weekend, we recognize names and stuff in the delegates who are speaking for you today. So you will hear a little bit of overlap there. We have generally broken the engagement results down into 4 categories that we think are particularly important here. The first is those adjacent neighbors or adjacent residents. The second is residents who are members of the general public, so folks who don't live immediately around the Patricia Street lot. The third is going to be those adjacent businesses that are, again, immediately around the Patricia Street lot, because we know that there are going to be more direct impacts on those businesses. And then finally, the general business community. As we look at the engagement results that we heard from residents directly, I'm just going to take a moment to summarize those results here. For adjacent residents, I would say that there was generally a split between support and non-support. At the doors, we heard from several community members who said, you know what, we have no concerns about this. Please do what it takes to support these businesses. Other residents, like you've heard from today, raised concerns like the loss of parking, the impacts of noise, and additional maintenance obligations that would be required to bring this project to fruition on Patricia Street. Looking at the broader community of the responses that we saw that came in as letters to council or in other avenues, the majority of residents from the broader community generally indicated they were supportive of the Patricia Street location. Some of the reasons for that was that they felt it would bring new vitality to this part of downtown, encourage more foot traffic. There were some concerns that were raised, including losing parking that is available on Patricia Street. One of the things we wanted to do was highlight the specific concerns from adjacent residents, because as the local residents, they will be sort of the most, they stand to be the most impacted by the project here. So as we've sort of heard and talked about a little bit, there are some specific concerns around the increase in the noise of the parking lot compared to normal operations. There were concerns about how there would be no washrooms on site, the additional maintenance obligations. There were concerns that it might not fit in aesthetically with the look and feel of downtown Jasper. And of course, there was the parking. Now, I will say overall, administration is confident that we can address these concerns both through good site design, operational practices, like making sure that businesses are being shut down in the evenings and aren't running late into the night, that sort of thing. But we do recognize that there will be some impacts, including potentially noise from air conditioning units and that sort of thing that we can try to mitigate. Finally, there is the concern around the loss of parking space. We recognize that regardless of where the pop-up village occurs in town is going to impact the local parking availability within that, regardless of whether it's at Connaught or at Patricia Street. Based on the data that we have from the paid parking program that's in place here in Jasper, our information indicates that the Connaught Drive lot regularly reaches around 90 to 95% occupancy in the summer months. Looking at the data again, Patricia Street rarely gets above about 40% occupancy. So when it comes to where is the demand for parking, we are seeing that overwhelmingly at Connaught Drive, whereas on Patricia Street, it's a little bit quieter, less likely to be totally full of parked cars and that sort of thing that are paying for that time. So that's one of the reasons why we are considering the balance of those two things, that the Connaught Drive parking stalls are sort of much more in demand in general. Looking at the business impacts. So again, the 3 sort of categories of folks that we heard from were the pop-up village participants, the businesses that are immediately around the Patricia Street lot, as well as sort of the general business community in Jasper. The pop-up business villages, they've been involved in this a little bit longer. We've had sort of more time to engage with them about the change in direction. Overall, we have found that their responses have generally been neutral to it. At this point in time, there's a clear indication that regardless of which location is selected, that it's important that we move forward with a location so that we can finalize things like site design, get servicing in place, and get those folks operating for the summer. The other 2 groups of businesses, I would say generally there's been more support for the Connaught Drive location, with the main concern being loss of parking from both folks who are directly impacted by the change in the use of the Patricia Street lot, as well as the broader business community. Some of the concerns that we heard from the Chamber of Commerce survey include that businesses not damaged by the fire will be operating in this location, that there would not be washrooms in place for staff and members of the public. And again, this loss of nearby parking stalls. I just want to be very clear that only businesses that were directly impacted by the fire and losing their brick and mortar spaces will be considered for this project. We are committed to using some of the grant funding, and we specifically set that aside to help fund washrooms on site. And again, we recognize that the parking question is a question of where locally will parking be impacted. In doing some research ahead of this time, I've identified roughly 1,275 parking stalls that are available within a 5-minute walk of downtown, some of which are heavily used, others of which are less likely to be used, either just from proximity to major destinations or from awareness from the broader sort of traveling public. With that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Kaylee LeBranch to talk a little bit more about sort of the disparities, the differences between the two locations, and to provide an update on that piece of the puzzle here for you.
Thank you, Lucas, and thank you, Council. So as we've heard, there are pros and cons to both sites. I think what we've heard coming back in the feedback makes that very clear. Between our earlier reported points when we brought to committee of the whole, as well with the incorporated feedback we have gotten from residents and businesses, which we are very grateful for, we wanted to provide a bit of a summary of the analysis provided in a nice simplified chart. What I want to start with is just to say that we can and we will make a good visitor experience at both sites. That is something we are dedicated as per the administration on working for. However, the Patricia Street is away from the train track noise and dust and noise from the rebuild activity nearby. We recognize both locations are going to draw different flows, but the Patricia Street location is more central and has less on-site parking, meaning there's a chance people who want to visit are going to need to park slightly away, walking past surrounding business windows to get there. We also know the Connaught location is not that far from the existing business community either, and closer to where the majority of the participating businesses who lost their space will be rebuilding. Next slide, please. Should wear my glasses. Okay, with our community engagement, we heard more on the impact of the parking stall loss at the Patricia Street location. So what we can say now is that there will be an impact on the loss of parking stalls at both sites. We also now have a better idea of how important those parking stalls at the Patricia Street are to some of those nearby businesses and residents. I also want to make a point to address the expansion capacity, as this was highlighted as a key point in the last committee of the whole meeting, and I did promise to come back with more information. We want to first thanks to Community Future West Yellowhead for helping clarify the number of eligible businesses based on the criteria for participating in the pop-up village. So, and a reminder of what that is it's businesses that lost commercial space and need a temporary location while they rebuild. It's for visitor serving businesses as opposed to those with a more resident serving or industrial focus, as we have a separate location that we'll discuss at another time in the industrial area for that. So Community Futures identified 26 eligible businesses in the downtown core, specifically kind of between the Hazel Street and the east side of Pyramid. They focused on this area because the pop-up village, like I said, is designed for visitor-facing businesses. So they thought it was important for me to communicate that in case there may be a business or two outside of that range who's fits into that criteria that they missed. However, since then, they asked us to communicate some businesses have since closed, relocated, or expressed disinterest in participating. So while that exact number remains uncertain of exactly how many would want to join in and be part of this and be eligible, what we do know right now is that there has been significant public awareness, especially after this week, for the project. We have had 7 businesses approach us expressing interest in being part of the project. Both proposed locations can accommodate the current demand and have the capacity for expansion. We will continue to support any business that lost space and wishes to participate moving forward in whatever capacity that ends up being, whether it's at the industrial location because that's a better fit for their location, or in the pop-up village here. I'm gonna finish by saying, regardless of the decision council makes today, we will work on our end to just make this as beneficial for the businesses and the community as a whole as possible. Pass it over to Director Sanders now.
Mayor Ireland, we leave it to you for your discussion and any questions that you may have of us.
Thank you all for that presentation then. Councillors, questions for administration? I might begin then, just with questions that were raised today by members of the public who chose to appear as delegations. There was a question about the style of the potential pop-up operations and whether they would be one level or double stacked. Can you speak to what is, one of you, I don't care who, can you speak to what is envisaged in physical terms for any particular operator that might be allowed a site in the pop-up village, wherever it may be?
Mayor Ireland, the first thing I will say is not double stacked, also not higher than double stacked, so single. I have seen one design from one of the initial businesses that approached with the proposal. And it was something that you wouldn't even recognize as a sea can. So nicely painted, but also with some nice adornment. So using wood and structure that would make it look like it belonged in Jasper. So even though it's temporary and it's not meant to last, the business owner is making an investment to make it look like something that is a business that a visitor or even a resident for that matter would want to visit. Other businesses have not yet disclosed what their design is, but we do have an expectation that it looked good. And I recognize that good is a subjective word.
But not more than one level in any of them?
No.
Thank you. There's also a question by the same individual about lighting. What would be the regulatory regime for lights, particularly late into the evening, that might disturb residents adjacent to the area?
Your worship, my expectation would be that all lighting has to conform with all bylaws that we have in the municipality. So dark sky, that kind of thing. My personal expectation would be that lights do not shine into someone else's yard or window.
I think you answered earlier to a question during the delegation portion, but buses are not contemplated as being part of this, and you referred specifically to rafting, and there would be a kiosk, I presume, for selling tickets, but not buses coming in to load passengers. Is that accurate?
That is my understanding. At either location, we're not anticipating buses and major transfers of like pickup and delivery of visitors. That happens somewhere else. It's very simply a storefront kiosk.
And finally, again, from a member of the public, did you again, or perhaps Mr. Sherwin, speak to the intended washroom facilities at the Patricia Street area if that was permitted?
Yes, your worship, I'll tackle that one. First, I will say what it's not. It's not a porta potty. It's nothing gross and smelly, but it is temporary on a trailer with running water. A high level portable washroom. We don't have the time or the ability to construct a building with a washroom for visitors. That's not in the cards, but there are multiple options out there that are just fine. The other thing I would like to add is the washroom at the pop-up business village is for business staff only, not for visitors.
Thank you for that. I will go through my notes, make sure I haven't missed other questions from members of the public that ought to be addressed, but I will turn first to other councillors. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I have two questions. I wondered if the administration can speak to the parking revenue in both locations. And my second question, Ms. LaBlanche, you had spoken to servicing of the sites. Do they both require the same amount of servicing, or is one more serviced right now than the other?
Acting CAO Nadon will take the revenue question, and then Mr. Sherwin will take the other.
Acting CAO, my question was around revenue in the Patricia Street parking lot and revenue in the Connaught Street parking lot. I know I've just heard there's differences, and I'm wondering if you can speak to the differences, or if you don't know that information, I appreciate that as well.
Mayor Ireland, through to Councillor Hall, what I can say is that the Connaught Drive parking lots are by far the most utilized, and not only due to their size, obviously more stalls, more utilization, but proportionately, people tend to gravitate to those catchment parking lots. My interpretation is it's the first ones they see and they just go to them. So it is true that proportionately, even with the number of stalls, which is about half in the old fire hall parking lot as opposed to the Connaught washrooms parking lot. My colleague, Mr. Sherwin, noted that 40% occupancy in that parking lot is the stat that we pulled. So that's from our annual paid parking reports and the stats that we get from Hotspot. I think observations probably suggest that the parking lot is more than 40% utilized. It is utilized by people who are exempt from the paid parking program and therefore are not captured in the hotspot data. So 40% occupancy in that lot sounds low, but that's because likely residents with passes who don't have to pay, therefore don't register with hotspot, there's no data on that, make up the rest of that occupancy. So that 40% occupancy number is probably a bit low, but that's my explanation why. And there's no revenue associated with residents who are not paying to utilize the lot. So I think that's where the difference is. I'm not sure if that answers your question directly, but that's the best I can offer.
It does, thank you.
To you, Councillor Hall, through the mayor, and I can provide a little bit of insight into those parking revenue numbers. So again, based on the reports that are available to us, the total revenue generation at the Connaught lot in 2023, so that doesn't account for last summer and some of the disruptions there. The total revenue generated there was $234,500. So it's about when you sort of aggregate that across each of those stalls, it's about $2,100 per stall over the course of the summer. At the Patricia Street lot, the total revenue generated in 2023 was $46,500 across the total of 55 stalls that are paid parking stalls, and that doesn't include the Parks Canada stalls there. That comes out to about $845 per stall. So the revenue generation as far as Connaught Drive, again, $2,132, and Patricia Street, $845. So a significantly more, sort of a higher per stall revenue generation for the municipality, and probably also speaks to some of the comments that acting CAO Nadon made around who is using that space, right? If the occupancy is higher than 40% and the revenue generation is significantly lower, that says to us that there are other folks using those stalls who aren't necessarily paying for them, right? When it comes to your question regarding servicing for the two sites, the sort of power line infrastructure that's coming in, that will be, by all accounts, a very similar number. I think we're talking a discrepancy of maybe a couple $1,000s between the two sites. The major servicing costs for the Patricia Street lot would be the inclusion of the washrooms, which isn't required at the Connaught Drive location.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you as well, acting CAO Nadon, around the Connaught Street parking lot being busier, but potentially it's because it's a catch-all, and I wonder if visitors would just drive to the next parking lot.
Deputy Mayor Valdes.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question around part of the survey of residents and so on. How far down Patricia Street did we go in talking to the residents? Did we go one block or 2 blocks beyond, I guess it's Pyramid Lake Road? Or did we stay within the encapsulation area close to that parking lot?
Through you, Mayor Ireland, to Deputy Mayor Melnick, it was a very short radius. We did not go very far. We did not have time to go very far. Mr. Sherwin, are you available to provide a more precise description?
If I can unmute myself, I absolutely will. Yes, as mentioned, the focus was almost entirely initially on those residences that backed directly onto the business pop-up village that we were looking at. So having heard from residents in that area on Tuesday last week, we went out door to door, I think, to each of the individual residences on Geeky, that block there. Hadn't initially anticipated to be in contact with folks living on Patricia Street directly. It just wasn't on our radar as a place that we needed to go. But we were contacted by residents in that area. So when that became apparent to us that it was a group of folks that we needed to listen to, we made sure to make time to hear from those folks. But it was really just people sort of within that 1 block radius around the Patricia Street location there.
Thank you for that, and that kind of frames where my next train of thought is going. With the loss of Patricia Street, it would mean that whatever paid parking was there would extend, people would continue perhaps down Patricia Street and potentially park illegally or in residential parking. Residents who are in the area who use the Patricia Street lot would also be affecting other people down Patricia Street as well, because their parking lot, or I shouldn't say their parking lot, a parking lot that was used by residents has been affected by the reduced number of stalls. So I think, when we look at Patricia Street, there's a number of other factors of what might happen if we take away that particular parking lot. And the reason I mentioned Patricia Street is that when people are coming down Patricia Street now and they want to go to, say, a drugstore or businesses before they get to the area that we're talking about, because of construction and because of volume, there may not be additional parking available on Patricia when you first turn onto the one-way on Patricia. There will be some rebuilding going on. There may be some sidewalks that are going to be going out into Patricia. There will be potentially some sidewalk seating. So the parking is going to be really limited down Patricia, and will probably force people to go to where that parking lot is right now. And that's just some considerations I would like to bring up to council, that when we're thinking about this, we have to consider the bigger traffic flow. And if I may, I'm going to continue on that train of thought. It was brought up about overnight visitors as well. The hotels that are in that area, given what I've heard at the last NETMA, the hotels are going to be very busy and very full. And those people are going to be in any hotel from the Whistler's Inn through to the Athabasca Hotel, through to the hostel, around the corner above the Olive. They're going to be looking for parking as well. And so, there will be that need for overnight parking in some sort of parking lot. The other businesses that, we talk about that are in and out type businesses are the banks that are in that area, where the residents may go in and do their banking, which is where you admit the parking lot may be busy, but we haven't really captured that convenience that's there for the residents. The post office, same type of thing. If people have driven down Connaught and the first parking stall they see is a 15-minute parking stall, and they're in a motorhome, they may miss the 15-minute parking, exasperating the ability for residents to get to the post office. Thus, down the road, that would be a potential parking lot for residents to be able to park, to be able to get to the post office. Just some thoughts about the value of a parking stall as well. We talk about a parking stall as a matter of revenue per stall generated annually. There's another value to a parking stall is what is that value in the revenues that it generates by the occupier of that stall? In other words, if you're able to park across the street from a restaurant or near a business that you want to frequent, that stall has additional revenue, which we haven't been able to measure. So, you know, while we have a revenue per stall calculation, we don't really know the secondary revenue or the actual in-town revenue that's generated by that stall. The other thing that I wanted to mention about Connaught, we're using historic figures in both parking lots. I shouldn't say just the Connaught site, but the Patricia Street site. There will be a decrease in business and there will be less volume in the community. There are businesses that were lost on Connaught. So the demand for those businesses in that Connaught site might also be less. And Connaught is our main street coming in and out. If you want to get onto Patricia, you're going to be driving by the Connaught parking lot one way or the other. From an exposure point of view, I do believe that the Connaught site would be better for exposure by the drive-in and drive-out traffic going through town. So those are some of the things that, in addition to what the survey had, that I think we need to consider when we're talking about what does a parking stall mean? What does the inconvenience of parking mean? How does that displace our residents? And for the residents, particularly in that area, how does that affect them when we have high visitation? So I just want to throw that for council consideration here today.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Melnick. In the absence of other hands, I had a couple of other questions that I will ask of administration. Firstly, was there any survey done of existing businesses on Connaught as to the impact of pop-up village on Connaught as opposed to Patricia Street?
Your worship, administration did not conduct that survey. We focused specifically on the immediate neighbors on the Patricia Street. The Chamber of Commerce survey, however, did gauge wider sentiment in the business community generally, along with other residents, but not specifically to businesses on Connaught.
All right, thank you for that. Have the 7 businesses who have so far indicated a desire to be in a pop-up village indicated any preference for one site as opposed to the other?
That's almost a trick question. The sentiment is please choose. And either will work. And the first businesses that identified this as an opportunity would probably prefer Connaught. I'm not going to name any names, and are also okay with Patricia. What's most important is that there be a pop-up business village where these businesses and the others that Ms. LaBranche was mentioning that are now also interested in participating can have a place to operate.
Thank you for that. And it was not intended to be a trick question. I think the last question I have relates to another presentation we heard earlier this afternoon, connected to business investments in, say, the parking authority or to the municipality with respect to either the creation or the allotment of stalls. And we heard, at least from one business person representing the downtown hostel, about an $80,000 investment in the Patricia Street parking area. And I have forgotten the details of that arrangement, but I'm curious whether anyone has investigated whether the municipality has any legal obligations with respect to the availability of stalls for any particular business, either at the Patricia Street parking area or cannot, because I remember at earlier times, development permits requiring cash in lieu for parking for businesses on Connaught that went into expansion of the parking on Connaught. My recollection is that those were required payments to get a development permit, and they didn't necessarily attach to any proprietary right in any of those stalls. But I would like to be on absolutely firm footing before we make a decision with respect to either lot, even though we have previously signified that we were fine with Connaught. The questions raised today raise a different issue in my mind, whether we have any legal obligations. Has anybody looked at that?
Mayor Arlen, I'll try this one. I would like to confer with my colleague, Director Malinchak. We have dealt with this in the context of paid parking, and there was such a situation in the Connaught washrooms parking lot. So we'd have to go back in the files and check exactly what happened there, and I think the downtown hostel is in more recent history and might have a similar situation. And essentially, it's not just that funding was directed to the parking authority for parking generally, but there may have been a promise of a specific allocation of a stall for a specific purpose. And like I said, we did run into that in the Connaught washrooms lot. The downtown hostel may be in a similar situation for the Patricia Street lot. However, my recollection is that the number of stalls we're talking about here is very small and could like 1 or 2, maybe 3 stalls. And that could likely be accommodated in both situations, regardless of where the business pop-up village ends up. But that is a good question. And I think between Director Malinchak and I, we could probably track down exactly what the status of those are.
Thank you for that, Director Sanders.
Yes, I've just had a handy message sent to me, section 6.3 of the parking authority bylaw, which says that every parking stall provided by the parking authority shall upon completion become the property and responsibility of the municipality and shall be operated and maintained to the same standards as other off-street parking stalls in the care and control of the municipality. So that may be in addition to, or it may answer your question. It doesn't answer the question, was there a really specific requirement, or was the requirement for an allocation to the parking authority, in which case this section applies, and it's in the general pool.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Final 2 questions. How many stalls are we talking about for 7 businesses? Whether it's Patricia Street or the Connaught washroom site?
21.
Do we know how many stalls exist in the Jasper the Bear parking lot? And I take it nobody has considered that, but it's closer to existing public washroom. And maybe it is different. There are no Parks Canada designated. Well, there might be Parks Canada designated stalls. I don't know, but.
So the consideration is location, the consideration is servicing and ease of servicing the site. The consideration on Connaught was proximity to washroom and ease of getting in and out. The consideration on Patricia was location and the hub and the visitor experience and having a nice quality of activity and bustle. So the Jasper the Bear site wasn't high on the list. I've also been updated that my answer 21 is wrong. It's 10, but we do want room for expansion. So I'm going to stick with 21.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. The 10 is how many are at the Jasper the Bear site.
Oh, thank you.
Apologies about that. You were correcting your original, somewhere between 21 and 25 stalls.
Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Melnick?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm just driving actually to the meeting today, and I did go by a couple of parking lots that haven't been in the mix here, but wouldn't be appropriate for the Park Up Village, but could be appropriate for offsetting the loss of parking stalls on Connaught. And those would be the resident parking lot that's currently at the corner of Mayette and Turret, I believe it is. And that has a resident parking lot sign on it. And at the end of Hazel, there's a parking lot where the farmer's market used to be. And if we could encourage downtown businesses who are on Connaught to encourage their staff and themselves to park at those alternate parking lots, we probably wouldn't lose any real parking on the Connaught site. There's no buildings around those two parking lots. They are available. And, you know, they could continue to become resident parking. And would be an opportunity to have workers and individuals who are working in the downtown core at that end of the downtown core. Because we have to remember the downtown core is what I consider Hazel to Pyramid Lake Road. That is the downtown core. We're talking about two sections in the downtown core. But this would mitigate the loss of parking stalls on Connaught.
Acting CAO middle.
Mayor Ireland through to Deputy Mayor Melnick, I'm fishing through my inbox. I don't have the information at hand. But those two lots you've just described are prime location for rebuild and recovery. And I don't have details and I can't tell you specifically what they would be considered for, but before directing any other uses towards those, I'd like to have the opportunity to get some information together.
I sincerely appreciate that because, you know, when people are looking at the business villages and options and other lots, I know of other lots that are being considered. I didn't consider those two being part of the rebuild. So it's really critical information that's important in making this decision. So thank you.
Councillor Waxer.
I was listening to all the conversation today. I remember thinking that one of the biggest surprises in becoming a new councillor in the first couple of years was how often at the council table we discussed cars and parking. And I wonder as time goes on with climate change, how we can eventually as a society move to less dependence on being able to park really close to the precise location we're intending to go. It's only a comment. And my other comment was that listening to the presentation last week, I was really buoyed and enthusiastic about the idea of the Patricia Street location, because I felt that it would really add vibrancy to the downtown core and also draw visitors' eyes to the businesses beyond the parking lot, because there is a bit of a distance between the two. So I was very surprised to see the level of concern and disdain for the ideas. So that has been something that I've had to consider in making my decisions.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland, and I echo Councillor Waxer's comments on how much we do talk about cars and parking. And I'm really glad we had a delegation this morning or this afternoon mention our transit system. And yes, while I do agree most domestic travels will probably want to bring their vehicles into town, and a lot of international visitors don't. And I appreciate this level of engagement. The businesses I thought that would benefit from that connecting our walkable downtown shopping area, if you will, are opposed. And this is what I envision this table to be. We experts weigh in, we hear from public, and we make a decision. And I do agree with Councillor Melnick around, and see, acting CO Nadon around that. Connaught Street parking lot is busy because it's the first one you get to, and I think people will move, drive past it, find other places to park. Yeah, so those are just my thoughts.
Are there any further questions for administration? Councillor or Deputy Mayor Melnick.
Thank you. I just wanted to express appreciation for the summary and the work that was done by the Chamber of Commerce and collectively the work that's been done by Urban Planning Department, this Sanders, your department, and Carly regarding pulling this information together for presentation for us. Along with the delegations earlier today, there's a lot for us to think about.
If there are no further questions, it might be time for a motion or not. But assuming that we have exhausted questions for administration, I too want to add my thanks for the information that you've gathered and presented to council. I just want to make it clear, if someone can, that in all of the feedback that you received, there was obviously differing views on the best location for a pop-up village in our community. I did not hear any suggestion that anyone at all was opposed to a pop-up village. Is that consistent?
Yes, I think, I did not speak individually with every single person, but of all the correspondence, the conversations I've had with staff that went door to door and the delegations, like to a person, everybody's like, this seems like a good idea, maybe not here, but in principle, a good idea.
That is certainly what I heard from delegations today, that I heard no one speak opposed to a pop-up village, but they had differences of opinion with respect to the location. And I say that because I think it speaks tremendously highly of the JRCC to have recognized the need for a pop-up village and brought it to us. It is something that will help, particularly those businesses who lost or which lost brick and mortar recovered. But if we do it right, I think it will assist other businesses with their recovery as well. I was, and it's just the nature of it, I suppose, but we had similar issues with respect to patio seating when it was taking away parking, and yet what I heard, and it might be more anecdotal than formal, but retail close to patio seating found a greater benefit from foot traffic walking by than they would have experienced from parking. And not anything that we have heard today, and I appreciate there wasn't time to do that study. But I do recognize that there was at least one member of the public who spoke to the benefits of foot traffic, perhaps there were two. And I might have been swayed by that, but obviously our residents and businesses in the area have different views as to the value of a parking stall as opposed to somebody walking past their establishment. But that's just the nature of it. Anyway, I thank you all for the presentation, and I thank JRCC tremendously for bringing forward the notion of a pop-up business village, because it has resonated despite the location where it might be situated. So thank you for that. Councillor Waxer.
I just also want to express appreciation for the concept of the pop-up village, as well as the clear and concise way that the information was presented to us today. It was very helpful. Thank you.
We are at a stage where we could have a motion and enter into debate. There is a recommendation, but if there is not a motion, I would suggest that there is a prior motion authorizing Connaught as a location for the pop-up village. And if there is not a motion to change that, then that motion, but go ahead, Councillor Hall.
If there are no other questions for administration or comments from council, I'm happy to make a motion. And before I make a motion, I just want to thank Ms. Savage for your comments on no matter where this goes, we're going to make it awesome. With that, I'm going to make the motion that council direct administration to maintain the retail pop-up village at previously proposed location on Connaught Drive.
Thank you for that motion. Councillor Hall, do you wish to speak to the motion at all? Anyone wish to enter into debate on the motion? It will be a motion to, I think, reaffirm a motion that is already on the books. That is fine, we can do that. If there is no debate, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. So again, thank you, to administration, for all your hard work on this, particularly for bringing to us the concept of a pop-up village, which is universally accepted. And thank you to residents who took the opportunity to come and appear before us and make their views known. Thank you all. That takes us to agenda item 6.6, 2024 equity, diversity, and inclusion updates. And again, this matter coming to us by way of recommendation from committee of the whole that council approved replacing the word master with the word action in the formal name of the equity, diversity, and inclusion plan. If there are no other questions for administration in this regard, do I have a councillor prepared to make that motion? Councillor Waxer. Thank you. Is there any debate on that motion? I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And that takes us to agenda item 6.7. Revisiting the 2025 approved budget. Again, coming to us by way of recommendation from committee of the whole. And despite the wording of the recommendation, I think that the intent of committee of the whole was that council consider today whether it is prepared to revisit and perhaps reopen the 2025 operating and capital budgets at this meeting. But if so, with direction to administration to return with either work or perhaps just to refer the matter to a committee of the whole. I did not understand the motion last week to suggest an entire review of the budget at this time, other than a decision to reopen and revisit the budget. In any event, that is what is before us. Are there any questions of administration regarding the recommendation? Deputy Mayor Mellon.
Thank you, Your Worship. The revisiting of the 2025 approved budget was a topic we discussed last meeting at the committee of the whole to come to this meeting for a decision. I'm not opposed to reopening the approved budget, but we're not in a position in this meeting to ask questions, I think, of administration, of finance, to be able to, I think, make any sort of suggestions as to how we can adjust the budget. I did make some observations that, the 2025 budget, capital and operating, does also impact future budgets. Any sort of implication of us changing an operating budget will mean that in subsequent years, we may be going back to those areas And while there might be an opportunity to reduce expenses this year, there are a number of things that are in place that we just can't touch, but we can't touch. There are certain obligations we have from, for example, operating our daycare. There are certain obligations we have to contracts we have to maintain our infrastructure, our computer systems, our accounting systems, and so on. And, you know, we won't get into that type of minutia detail today. But I do think that, you know, there is an opportunity to perhaps look at what are the potential touchables and what are the untouchables. And that might be a better or healthier conversation once we perhaps go through the budget and come up with a list of questions for administration to come back with what is in some of the lines that we might be able to look at and review.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. No. I concur with those comments. I do have one, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Waxman.
I just was taking a moment to formulate my thoughts, but I too am open to reviewing the 2025 budget. But one of the thoughts that I considered is we, at the council table, we hear very articulate feedback from the business community. But as a councillor who sits on a number of who attends the community conversations, that's where we hear the stories and concerns of individuals, residents who are living in the community and have experienced the services offered by the community. So I think that this process is going to be very much have to really consider the balance between acknowledging the concerns of the business community, but also recognizing the needs of the individual residents of our community and the value of the services that we offer to their the value that offers to their well-being.
Thank you, Councillor Waxer. I have one, I think, straightforward question for administration, which I think is critical before we look at a motion to revisit or reopen the budget, and that is whether any irrevocable action has been taken with respect to the budget. It goes to Deputy Mayor Melnick's observation that there might be areas where we cannot go. And so if on the basis of an approved budget, administration has made commitments in certain areas, it may be too late to revisit those, and we would have to know that. That is something that could be discussed after the motion, but it's critical that we know, because we cannot reopen any matter where irrevocable action has already occurred. So just generally speaking, is our acting CAO able to respond at all to commitments that may have been made with respect to the approved budget?
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I will utilize my knowledge as a director as well to try to answer this question. And I would say that yes, in all areas, irrevocable actions have been taken, as in capital budgets or capital projects are started, operating expenses are incurred, staff positions hired for at varying degrees and varying levels. So each department will be progressing differently on different files. So we'd have to find out a bit more specifics about which areas could or couldn't be affected by those irrevocable actions. But certainly the budget's been approved since the end of December, namely in the capital budgets area. I anticipate a lot of them are underway. That's the one way we get them done in the year, is get on them early in January. So for capital more so than operating, but also if I have a position approved in my operating budget, it's in my best interest to get the team staffed up as soon as possible. As you know, we've had challenges with recruitment, so there might be varying levels there. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you for that. If there are no further questions for administration with respect to the agenda item, is there a councillor with a motion? I was going to ask if councillors need some time to prepare a motion. I would be happy to call a recess unless there was a motion about to be formulated on the fly.
Recess might be appropriate.
It is now 8 minutes after 4. That will give us a 7-minute recess. Hopefully that will be enough. We can reconvene at 4:15 and see whether we have a motion. Okay. With apologies to those who have been waiting online, we're 2 minutes over time for our recess, but I will call us back to order at 4:17. We are still on agenda item 6.7. Question of revisiting the 2025 approved operating capital budget. I believe that Deputy Mayor Melnick has either a motion or some comments.
Thank you, Your Worship. And one thing I do want to start off with the comments in that as a municipality, we approved an operating and capital budget for 2025 with the intent of finishing with a balanced budget by the end of the year. And I guess prior to making my motion, I would like to ask administration, and again, it wouldn't be for today, but prior to us reopening or making any changes to our approved operating and capital budget, I'd like to know the implication, what that would have on the provincial government commitments that were announced in the budget by the provincial government, which would cover our shortfalls for this operating year. And the reason I would like to understand those implications before changing an approved budget is that if we change an approved budget, will that mean that the provincial government will not be covering as much of our shortfall? So I think that's something I'll ask Acting CAO Nadon if you have questions about the direction of my what I'd like administration to do before we make any changes to the operating and capital budget. I'd like to understand what that implication would be as it relates to that provincial government commitment.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Melnick. I understand your question, and I'm not exactly sure how to address it, but I understand what you're requesting.
And the reason I request that is we can reopen and look at the approved operating and capital budgets. But prior to making any changes, I think it's important we understand the bigger implications. And that's where that, I think, understanding of how that would affect the approved funding from the provincial government to basically make us whole this year as a municipality, given our circumstance.
If I might just follow from Deputy Mayor Melnick's comments and inquiry. I recognize that in this time of recovery, staff has many challenges. One of them is simply capacity to get all of the work done that needs to be done. In this case, to the extent that we revisit the approved budget, we reopen a number of things that will, again, strain the capacity of administration. I am hopeful that on that very general question from Deputy Mayor Melnick, that might be something that could be within the capacity of administration within a short period of time. But I am sensitive and respectful of the question, because we have, I think, now a commitment of about $3 million of stabilization funding to offset what we know will be revenue loss. If we reduce the budget only to find that there is an equal reduction in the stabilization funding, it's questionable whether we've served any purpose whatsoever. But I don't know what it would be involved to find that answer, or to work through the logistics of that. And is that something that might be achievable by committee of the whole next week?
Mayor Ireland, the challenge I'm facing is that the people that were involved in those discussions with the province are both away, that being CAO Given and Director of Finance, Mrs. Malinchak. So that's why I have a bit of a difficulty figuring out how we would do that. I mean, short of asking the province directly, right? So finding the right contacts, asking the question. It's a commitment that is significant and quite helpful for our community. Asking the question itself, what might come of it, I don't know, but if that is your direction and you would like us to inquire directly with the government of Alberta, what would happen if we were to revisit the budget, and would that funding be impacted? That is direction I'm happy to take. However, our ability to act on it currently would be a bit hindered, not impossible, but I would have to figure out exactly who to talk to and how to go about it is the insight I don't have, but I could consult with the team and see what we can come up with.
It's difficult to imagine in this electronic age that the province doesn't already know the question. However, that's not the same as having asked it. Is there a motion to be put forward?
Committee reform, but not necessarily tying to next week. That would work. Your worship, and with respect to administration, I will put forth a motion that is slightly different than what's on the recommendation. I would recommend or make a motion that council revisit the 2025 approved operating and capital budgets at a future committee of the whole meeting. That is not the next meeting. I think we need to give administration, given everything else that's going on, an appropriate time to, I think, answer the question, which I think is critical to us reopening. But I do want to move this along, that we are open to reviewing the approved budget, but we need to know what the implications of that are. And I'm going to be giving some thoughts as to what the implications that might be to future budgets in 2026, 2027, and so on. That's not part of what the motion is. So just for the clarity for council and administration, that council revisit the 2025 approved operating and capital budgets at a future committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you for the motion. I will just confirm that that's sufficient clarity for administration. Potentially, there might be another motion of direction for the information that was mentioned earlier, because although it's public spoken, there's not a direction, but we might help administration with that. The intent is, as I understand the motion, to approve revisiting the 2025 approved operating and capital budgets at this time, but to do that review at a future committee of the whole meeting with the information as to the ramifications of the change. Correct?
Thank you, Your Worship. That's exactly the intent.
Does anybody wish to speak to the motion? All right, I will call the question in. All those in favor? There are none opposed. Before we leave the subject, though, does administration have a need for precise direction as to the information that has been requested?
Thank you for asking, Mayor Ireland. I think the request is clear. Whether you would like to formalize it in the form of council direct administration to find that information could be an additional step. I don't know that it's, I mean, if I have clear marching orders, it would clarify them even further if you passed a motion, but I do understand the request and the intent.
Thank you for that.
And Your Worship, further to the request from administration, I would like to make the motion that council direct administration that they obtain the information from the provincial government regarding the implications of reopening our capital and operating budgets as to how that might affect the shortfalls that the provincial government is currently covering, or to what the provincial government has committed to the municipality in the last budget. Yeah.
It is now a direction, or at least it will be after a vote. Not sure that it's any more clear, but it's clear enough. All right, any debate on that motion to direct administration to make the necessary inquiries on that topic? All right, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That motion is carried. And thus there is some degree of clarity and a motion to direct administration through acting CAO Nadon. All right, that takes us through agenda item 6. There are no notices of motion before us. I see no hands to raise anything, so that dispenses with agenda item 7. Takes us to agenda item 8, councillors' reports. Are there any reports of councillors? Deputy Mayor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Last evening, I attended the Jasper Yellowhead Historical Society's annual general meeting, and a new board of directors was nominated. And we also had a presentation by the gentleman who wrote a book based on some of his interviews while people were evacuated. And that book is available at the Municipal Library. He also had an opportunity to present to us and have questions from some of the public who were at the meeting. It was, I found it to be a very interesting presentation. The second thing I'd like to mention is that tomorrow I'll be attending a virtual meeting for Alberta municipalities as a council member for Towns West, our zone Towns West, just for an update from Alberta municipalities.
I too will be attending that event.
Thank you. Any additional reports? Seeing nothing, we can move to agenda item 9, upcoming events, the Jasper Business Recovery Lunch and Learn sessions that was commencing April 3rd and weekly after that at noon. The Jasper Pride and Ski Festival commences on April 4th, which is Friday, and I know this was discussed a week ago. My understanding is that the flag raising at Commemoration Park is at 12:15, I believe, but I might say 12 noon just so you're not late. The Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce annual general meeting is April 16th at Cassio's Restaurant. NETMA having returned, the next one will be April 23rd at the Jasper Yellowhead Museum and Archives, and there is, as I recall, a guest speaker. National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and 2F's LGBTQJ+ peoples, also known as Red Dress Day, will happen on May 5th. And of course, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities annual conference is May 29th to June 1st in Ottawa. Not on the list, but I think coming up on Thursday evening, members of RMA, the Regional Municipalities Association of Alberta, are in town and have invited councillors to join them for dinner. That's Thursday, April 3rd, I guess it must be. Are there any other upcoming events which should be brought to the attention of council? If not, we can happily move to agenda item 10. And I would look for a motion to adjourn at 4:33 p.m. Thank you, Councillor Waxer. All those in favor? There are none opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Most of the gallery has already departed, but I thank those who stayed to the end. Always appreciated, and thanks to those who stayed through our Zoom platform and those who watch us on our YouTube channel. And that is it for today. Thank you all.